Most people think wealth is built by making more money. It's not. It's built by repeating small behaviors so consistently that time has no choice but to reward you. And here's the uncomfortable part. Most high-income earners will never become wealthy, while some painfully average earners quietly build seven-figure net worths over 30 years. That contradiction should bother you. Because if income alone determined wealth, the highest-paid people in America would all be financially free. But the data doesn't support that. The median millionaire in the US didn't inherit money. They didn't hit a startup jackpot. They didn't day trade crypto at the perfect time. They followed habits, repetitive, almost boring habits, for decades. My name is Marcus Hale, and I spend way too much time thinking about how everyday Americans quietly build long-term wealth. If you're someone who makes decent money, but still feels like you're not getting ahead financially, make sure to hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if this helps you out. Here's the real problem. Most people focus on events instead of habits. They wait for the raise, they wait for the market crash, they wait for the perfect investment, they wait for when things calm down. But wealth doesn't grow in big events. It grows in daily repetition. And the reason this matters is simple. Compound growth doesn't just apply to money. It applies to behavior. If you repeat a $50 mistake every week for 30 years, that compounds. If you repeat a $50 smart decision every week for 30 years, that compounds too. Let's make this painfully clear with math. If you invest $200 per month at an 8% average annual return for 30 years, you don't end up with $72,000. You end up with around $298,000. That extra $226,000 didn't come from you working harder. It came from time compounding disciplined behavior. Now here's what most people don't realize. The first 5 to 10 years feel pointless. In year 5, you'd only have about $14,000 invested. That doesn't feel life-changing. That doesn't feel wealthy. That doesn't feel worth it. And that's exactly why most people quit. They don't fail because the math doesn't work. They fail because the early years feel slow. This is where psychology becomes more important than income. Human beings are wired for visible rewards. If you go to the gym for 2 weeks and don't see abs, motivation drops. If you invest for 3 years and only see modest growth, your brain says, this isn't working. But compounding is backloaded. The last 10 years of that 30-year example produce more growth than the first 20 combined. Let me say that again. The final third of the timeline does more work than the first 2/3. That's insane when you think about it. And yet, people interrupt the process right before the curve steepens. So, what are the habits that actually compound for 30 years? The first one is painfully unsexy. Relentless consistency in automated investing. Not big investing, not aggressive investing, not perfect investing. Automated investing. Because automation removes emotion. Look, when you rely on motivation, you'll lose. Motivation fluctuates. Discipline tied to a system does not. Let's say someone makes $70,000 a year and decides to invest 15% of their income. That's $10,500 per year, or about $875 per month. At an 8% average return over 30 years, that grows to roughly $1.3 million. Not because they were brilliant, because they were consistent. Now you might be thinking, yeah, but what if the market crashes? It will, multiple times. Over a 30-year period, you are almost guaranteed to experience recessions, bear markets, political chaos, maybe even financial crises. But here's what most people don't realize. Volatility is not the enemy of compounding. Interrupting contributions is. When markets drop 20%, your future returns improve, but only if you keep buying. And this is where habit number 1 quietly compounds wealth. Investing regardless of headlines. Most Americans check their investments emotionally. When markets go up, they feel smart. When markets go down, they feel anxious. And when anxiety spikes, they pause contributions. That one behavioral mistake can cost hundreds of thousands over 30 years. Imagine someone who invests $800 per month for 30 years, but stops investing for just 3 years during downturns. Depending on timing, that decision alone could reduce their final portfolio by $200,000 or more. Not because the market failed them, because their habit failed them. And here's something subtle that rarely gets discussed. Automation doesn't just build wealth, it builds identity. If every 2 weeks, money leaves your paycheck and goes into investments before you touch it, you start to see yourself as someone who invests. Identity drives long-term behavior more than goals. A goal says, I want to retire wealthy. An identity says, I'm someone who builds wealth. Those are different. The second habit that compounds over 30 years isn't about investing at all. It's about lifestyle restraint. And this is where things get uncomfortable. As income rises, most lifestyles rise faster. A $10,000 raise becomes a $9,500 spending increase. Bigger apartment, newer car, nicer vacations, more subscriptions. The problem isn't enjoying money. The problem is locking in higher fixed costs. Here's why that matters. If you increase your fixed expenses by $500 per month, that's $6,000 per year. Over 30 years, that's $180,000 in spending. But invested at 8%, that $6,000 per year becomes roughly $680,000. That's the opportunity cost of lifestyle creep. Almost $750,000. And most people don't even notice it happening. This is where it gets really interesting. Lifestyle inflation feels earned. You worked harder, you got promoted, you deserve the upgrade, but compounding doesn't care about what you deserve. It only responds to what you repeat. When someone upgrades their car every 5 years with a $600 monthly payment, instead of driving a paid-off vehicle and investing that same $600, over 30 years at 8%, that difference is over $900,000. One habit, one repeated decision, nearly $1 million gap. And this is why income doesn't determine wealth. Spending habits do. There are doctors living paycheck to paycheck. There are teachers retiring millionaires, because wealth is what you don't see. Now here's the belief that quietly sabotages people for decades. I'll get serious about investing when I make more. No. If you can't invest 10% at $60,000, you won't magically invest 20% at $120,000. Behavior scales. If you practice lifestyle creep at lower income, you'll practice it at higher income. And this is where most financial advice completely misses the mark. It tells people to focus on earning more. Earning more helps, absolutely. But income amplifies habits. It doesn't fix them. If someone saves 5% consistently, doubling income doubles savings. If someone saves nothing consistently, doubling income doubles nothing. And that's the trap. People think the breakthrough moment will come from a bigger paycheck. But the truth is, wealth is built long before income peaks. It's built in the early modest years. It's built when restraint feels inconvenient. It's built when consistency feels boring. And if that challenges what you've been telling yourself, good. Because dismantling the belief that more income automatically fixes everything is the first step toward understanding what actually compounds over 30 years. Because here's what replaces that belief. The third wealth habit that compounds for 30 years is increasing your investment rate every time your income rises. Not upgrading your life first, upgrading your ownership first. This is where it gets really interesting. Most people treat raises as spending opportunities. Wealth builders treat raises as acceleration fuel. If you're making $70,000 and investing 10%, that's $7,000 a year. If you get a $10,000 raise and keep investing 10%, now you're investing $8,000. That's fine. But here's what most people don't realize. If instead of keeping your investment rate flat, you increase it, say from 10% to 15% after that raise, your wealth curve changes dramatically. That extra $5,000 per year invested over 25 years at 8% doesn't just add $125,000. It adds roughly $395,000. One decision at one promotion. Nearly $400,000 difference. Now stretch that pattern over 30 years with multiple raises. The person who increases their savings rate with each income bump ends up in a completely different financial universe than the person who keeps their percentage stagnant. And the psychology behind this is powerful. Because when your lifestyle rises slower than your income, you create margin. Margin creates flexibility. Flexibility creates confidence. Confidence reduces financial stress. Financial stress reduction allows you to make better long-term decisions. It's a reinforcing loop. Now you might be thinking, okay, but what if I actually need the raise to cover higher living costs? Fair. Life does get more expensive. Housing rises, healthcare rises, kids happen. But here's the behavioral rule. Wealthy households follow almost automatically. Never allocate 100% of a raise to lifestyle. Even if it's just 30% redirected to investments. Even if it's small. That rule alone compounds massively. Let's make it concrete. Imagine two people. Both start at $60,000. Both get 3% annual raises. Both average 8% investment returns. Person A keeps their savings rate fixed at 10%. Person B increases their savings rate by 1% every 2 years until they hit 20%. Over 30 years, that difference can easily exceed $500,000. $500,000 created purely from gradual rate increases. Not stock picking, not timing markets, not side hustling every weekend. Behavioral escalation. And this is where we need to talk about time. Because people wildly underestimate what 30 years actually means. 30 years is 360 months. 360 repetitions of the same financial behavior. Compounding is not magic. It's repetition multiplied by time, multiplied by return. But here's the deeper psychological layer most people miss. When you increase your savings rate slowly over time, you avoid what psychologists call lifestyle shock. Huge cuts feel painful. Gradual adjustments feel normal. If you suddenly try to jump from saving 5% to 25%, you'll likely quit. But moving from 5% to 7% this year, then 9% 2 years later, then 12%? That feels manageable. And manageable habits are sustainable habits. Now let's zoom out for a second. After observing financial outcomes across decades, through recessions, tech bubbles, housing crashes, pandemic volatility, one pattern remains brutally consistent. The people who automate contributions, resist lifestyle inflation, and steadily increase their savings rate almost always end up wealthy if they stick with it long enough. The investment vehicle matters far less than the behavior pattern. This is where the mid-video realization hits. Wealth is not about intensity, it's about duration. Most people approach money like a sprint. They binge save for 6 months. They hyper-focus during a market crash. They get excited during bull runs. But wealth rewards boring consistency over dramatic effort. Think about it like brushing your teeth. You don't brush intensely for 3 hours once a week. You brush twice a day, every day, for decades. Investing works the same way. Now let's address the big objection. What if I start late? Look, starting late doesn't disqualify you, but it does increase the required intensity. If you start investing at 25 with $500 per month at 8%, you end up with roughly $745,000 by 55. If you wait until 35 to invest that same $500, you end up with about $283,000 by 55. 10-year delay, nearly $500,000 difference. That's not motivational hype, that's math. But here's what most people don't realize. Starting late is still infinitely better than not starting. Even 20 years of disciplined investing compounds meaningfully. The key is eliminating the belief that you need perfect timing to begin. You don't. You need consistency starting now. And this week is a powerful psychological lever. Not next year. Not when markets stabilize. Not after the next raise. This week. Because the longer you wait, the steeper the hill becomes. Now let's turn this into something practical. First actionable rule. Automate at least 10% of your gross income into investments before it hits your checking account. If that feels aggressive, start at 5%, but set a calendar reminder today to increase it by 1% in 6 months. Not someday, 6 months from now. Second rule, every raise triggers a savings increase. Non-negotiable. even if it's small. If you get a $5,000 raise this year, commit right now that at least $1,500 of it goes toward investing. Write that rule down. Third rule, cap lifestyle inflation intentionally. When you upgrade something, downgrade something else. If you move into a more expensive apartment, delay upgrading your car. If you buy a new car, pause luxury travel upgrades for a year. Force trade-offs, because trade-offs create awareness, and awareness protects compounding. Here's a time-bound action you can take this month. Open your pay stub. Calculate your current savings rate. Not how much you plan to save, how much you actually save. If it's below 10%, increase it by at least 1% before the month ends. That 1% might feel trivial, but over 30 years, it's not. At $80,000 income, 1% is $800 per year. At 8% for 30 years, that's roughly $90,000. From a 1% adjustment. This is why wealth feels invisible early. The numbers look small, the effort feels repetitive, but the accumulation curve doesn't care about feelings. It responds to systems. Here's what most people don't realize. The biggest financial advantage isn't higher IQ, it's longer commitment. The average millionaire in America didn't outsmart the market. They outlasted their own impulses. They kept investing during fear. They kept restraint during raises. They kept increasing contributions slowly. And after 30 years, the math simply overwhelmed everything else. So if you feel behind, if you feel like you've wasted time, if you feel like your income isn't high enough, understand this. Wealth isn't built in dramatic leaps. It's built in small behaviors repeated 360 times over 30 years. Calmly, quietly, almost invisibly. The people who win financially aren't always the most talented. They're the most consistent. And if this shifted how you see your own financial habits, do two things. First, hit subscribe, because we break down money psychology and long-term wealth strategies like this every week. Second, drop a comment below and tell me which habit you're committing to improve first: automation, lifestyle restraint, or increasing your savings rate. Because once you decide who you are financially, the habits start reinforcing that identity. And identity, repeated long enough, compounds just like money. Now it's your move. That's all for today. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.